Once I get to the right thing, okay, share, and I'm going to go here. All right, can everybody see this?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. So as stated, the goal today is to kind of talk through, an approach to building your resume, kind of looking back at your past experiences, and as well kind of what others are going to be looking at once you actually put the resume in front of them. This session typically does not actually take a full hour, which will probably be a nice respite for everybody, because I'm sure you're overworked and tired as all hell. But please do feel free to ask questions. I want to make sure it's as two-sided as possible versus me just talking at the screen. But with that said, let's get the party started. I'm gonna go all the way back here to the beginning, and here we go. Resume knowledge and tips. This is a fact. On average, it will take about 6 to 8 seconds for a recruiter or hiring manager to look over your resume. That's crazy scary, but it's actually very true. That first skim or scan really is looking to say, looking to understand, is like, what have they done? What technologies have they used? Where have they been? And use that as kind of that initial, should I dig in a little bit more? A resume that does catch my eye, of course, I'll start looking more than 6 to 8 seconds, but that's typically how long it takes, right? To understand where they've been, what it is that they've been a part of, what it is that they've quickly accomplished, and what they've used to do it. So because of that, you definitely do want to make sure that it is easy to read and very well organized. For the purposes of this transition into tech or into engineering, most of you, if it is a full transition, will definitely want to keep it to one page. There's certainly possibility that it might need to be a little bit longer depending upon your backgrounds, but the goal here, right, would be to make it simple, scannable, and a single page entry, kind of going over all of your background. Want to make sure that your GitHub as well as your LinkedIn profiles are there. If you need to change the links for those, please do, but make sure that those are updated and valid, and that if somebody were to actually click on them, that they go to the places that you want them to go. This next bullet, I think, is extremely valid, and we talked about this in our initial discussion, I believe, and we'll talk about it a little bit more as we start preparing for interviews. Really avoid, or try to avoid, just listing your responsibilities, right? You don't want your resume to read like a job description for somebody that was trying to get that job, right? What you want to do is talk through your impact, talk through what exactly happened because of the responsibilities that you had. Data and results are always key, right? You're going to have an opportunity to expand upon that during conversation, but you really want to talk through impact and have impact statements on your resume versus, develop code in this, or a simple, like, this was the system that we worked within or developed. Well, great, that's awesome. Like, what the hell did it do, right? If there's a way to quantify that, we really want to focus in on those components versus just what it was that you did. This last one, obviously valid as well. Summarize what you were specifically doing and how it was that you contributed to how it contributed to who you are today and your professional skills. Now, this bullet is really pertaining more to your past experience if it's not technical or engineering or development focused, right? You really want to try to find, to use corporate buzzwords in corporate speak, right, the synergies in your past experiences to what would obviously be relevant as you transition into an engineering focused role. So this is obvious. I shouldn't say it's obvious, right? These are the things that, again, if you do not come from an engineering background or a development background, that any organization is really going to look for their employees to have, right? And the good thing is, right, and you probably are going to be able to highlight these skills in some of your accomplishments in the past, right? The biggest one is kind of further down the list, is communication skills, right? If you're not able to highlight those in your resume, which can be hard, right? To specifically hone in on communication skills themselves, make sure you're practiced and adept at talking through those during a conversation, right? Or during an interview, because communication, the ability to communicate, specifically as an engineer, the ability to break down a problem, right? Which is key here as well, and effectively communicate a solution, right? To varying audience, right? It's not always the same folks. Sometimes it's engineers, sometimes it's stakeholders, whatever the heck it is. But being able to effectively communicate to a diverse audience is like a paramount skill for near every organization that you're going to be a part of. Now, these other ones: teamwork and collaboration, problem solving skills, creativity and ingenuity, leadership. Those are things that you could probably look to past experiences and pretty easily highlight. The communication specifically, I think, is something that you want to practice communicating, right? Like how exactly you can put that out there. But it is very, very important, and it's something that your interviewers are probably going to be looking for as well. Oh, shoot. So I've got two resumes. We've used these in the past to kind of highlight differences, right? Like a change in let me see if I can get it here. Sorry. Improvements in resumes, if you will, right? So this first one, it's actually called, and I'm dropping it in the Papa Platoon channel right now. Let me know if you don't have it. But to call it a bad resume isn't appropriate, probably, but it is one that could use some improvement. So what I'd like for you all to do is pop that open, take a look, and then just real quickly tell me what you think about it, right? I don't think bad resume is the right way to put it, but are there good things? Are there bad things? Does it relate to your resume? Is it totally different? Like, what do you think of this one? And you could just shout out as thoughts come up.
I don't like that it's 2 pages.
Fair.
It doesn't seem like it has a name on there.
It doesn't.
Contact information.
Yeah, well, that's actually it's a blinded resume. If you really look closely, you probably can figure out who the hell it is if you look. But it was intentionally the person's name was taken off of it.
There's too much white space.
Yeah, the design itself, sure.
I'd say they probably start good, like in the first bullet with actual numbers, but like if you get to the second bullet, like manage a team of developers, scrum masters, project managers, product owners, and quality assurance.
Yep.
It's just like, okay, that's what
I think the biggest problem is that there's no results on it.
Sorry. Yeah, excuse me just a second. I'm having the daughters vying for some attention. One quick moment. Hey, can you give me just a moment there? I'll be with you as soon as I can, I promise. Okay, she hit the door. All right. Sorry about that.
Sounds like my house on most nights.
Yeah, 100%. I was going to say, I was thinking the same thing.
I was gone all day, just got home. My 8-year-old just wants me to pay attention to her, which makes sense. I want to pay attention to her as well, but there are other things we have to do for the moment. Cool. All those things were valid points, right? And I think the biggest one, right, was definitely called out, was that there really aren't impact statements here, right? There are a number of things that kind of talk through, kind of what their basic responsibilities are, right? And where they fit within the organization to some extent, but it doesn't really offer any true results, right? And that's kind of top to bottom, right? There are some aspects, right? And I guess I can move this over, or everybody's looking at it, so it doesn't really matter. But it's not bad. Like it isn't a bad resume, and I think the experience is great, right? I mean, they had a number of years of experience, 10 plus years, right? Of working on some pretty cool stuff, good background, talk through, you can obviously see a progression, right? But what you don't see is, again, the results. And I think the other thing that is a little kooky, right, is the use of technologies, right? They talk a little bit about the environments that they were in and supporting, but didn't really in a clear manner display what it was that they were using for specific applications, right? And it's probably something that you're going to want to do, right? Now I've got another one that I'll put in here now. This one is same candidate or same colleague, same friend of mine that after a little retooling came back with this. And again, not the most perfect resume, but at the same point in time, probably improved, right, to what it was initially. So you can see the difference specifically in that most recent role, right? That's, or at least the top role here, right? Still wanted to talk through leadership, right? And improving team morale. But biggest one is now we've got numbers, right? There's, tell us what exactly they did in regards to improving morale and creating focus in regards to interviewing, how that actually affected the organization, right? We were able to make 12 hires, right? They solved the lag in development schedule and what exactly that did, right? For the organization, the communication tools, right? Like what that did to help create a stronger sense of team, right? And collaboration. These are things that are impactful to an organization and worth kind of throwing out there, right? Like those are the things that are going to be a little bit more impactful to somebody reading it as well, because it shows not just the actions that we're taking, but what those actions actually led to, right? And we talked about this in our first session. I've kind of said it a few, I'll probably say it a few more times, right? The STAR method, right? Really focusing in on the situation, the tasks, the actions, and the response, right? The results. Like that's really what you want to be looking at as you're framing up your resume, is kind of thinking it through in that mindset, not just your resume, but also as you get into interviews and you start talking to folks, same type of thing, answering questions with that type of framework, because it shows clear line of thought. It shows what it was you were asked to do, and obviously what the results are. Like it proves out what you're capable of, right? And how you can impact an organization. Does that make sense? Are there any thoughts? No comments? Par for the course.
What would you say are like the most impactful changes that you made to improve his resume?
Well, I think the introduction of numbers is one, even though it's not across the board. But the other thing is again, there's actual results that are listed here to some of these. Like even if it doesn't have a number associated to it, there's an impact for each one of the bullet points. So it's less about just the responsibility, but what the hell it did, right? It improved team morale, right? Focus on understanding and stronger output, right? A stronger development flow, right? Better communication and stronger team collaboration. Like even if those aren't numbers necessarily, they do focus in on what the efforts that he was involved in, what they did, right? How they impacted the team and those around them. And I don't think that existed as clearly in the first resume. Again, I don't think the first resume is trash, right? By any means, but it could use a little bit more force on like what exactly we did, right? Cover letters. Has anybody talked about cover letters? Have you thought about cover letters? Does anybody use cover letters? Does anybody have thoughts around cover letters?
I actually do have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
So,
go for it.
a lot of the research I've done on cover letters is that the majority of them are actually not even read, and the ones that are read are maybe skimmed.
Yep.
And like a lot of times, it seems like more in this new like ADD age that we live in, it's not necessarily necessary to actually write a cover letter, even if it says it's required. Do you feel like this is more of just like propaganda, or do you feel like there's actually merit to the research that I've found?
No, I'd agree with that. I would agree. I am not in the camp of cover letters are worth your time, right? But there are exceptions to that, right? There are absolutely exceptions. There's a number of things, but I would agree overall that that writing a cover letter for every applications makes no sense. Like it's just doesn't make sense. But there are instances and reasons why you might want to include a cover letter, but there are other ways to do it, right? So I'm going to go through this, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because very, very valid question or point of like, does it really make sense? And sometimes it just does not. Is anybody else have any feelings or thoughts around cover letters before we move on? Okay, so this is true, right? Formal cover letters that repeat the resume information, they're not helpful, right? And that's oftentimes what we see, and that's oftentimes why cover letters are just not read, or there's the thought that is the case. They're not helpful if that's the case. It doesn't make any sense to us, right? If one is not required, which most often they are not, you can still provide it, right, through a cover email, right? The other thing that I do think is sometimes worthwhile. And I'll kind of insert this. There are a few instances or other ways to do it, right? Sometimes you don't need a formal actual like document or cover letter, like as you're making an application in the ATS or like the application flow, right? ATS is applicant tracking system. Like when you go to hit apply, right? Like you can sometimes insert a little message or something like that, right? You can often just put a little blurb in there, right? What's important there in my mind, and why I think a cover letter or an insert of an additional comment with an application is necessary, is if your resume reflects a location other than where you are applying a job. If you are living in Chicago, for instance, and you're applying for a job in Columbus, I can guarantee you, without indicating that you have a genuine interest in moving to Columbus, that resume is never going to be considered, right? Or I shouldn't say never. It's not likely that it's going to be considered, right? Or if you, if there's if you want to call out a specific why around this role and why you, a cover letter might make a lot of sense. But on the whole, just a cover letter for the sake of a cover letter, I don't think makes a lot of sense. But for those that are transitioning, sometimes it does, right? Like if I get somebody that is new to an engineering role or has limited experience with a different tech stack, maybe they want to call out what they've been doing within our tech stack, right? Like that, even if it's not in their past experience, like there's ways that the cover letter makes that worthwhile, right? But overall, agreed, don't do it if you don't have to. The one thing that I will say as we kind of go along here is sometimes they are worthwhile. Look at the company, right, and what their voice is, what their brand is, and try to match that a little bit, right? Like don't get crazy, don't be too staunchy, right? Like somewhere in the middle that makes sense with their specific brand voice. Proofread, no typos, absolutely. I get a lot of cover letters that are addressed to a different hiring manager or a different company, right, or a different role, right? Because it is that blanket cover letter, right? That maybe has been used over and over again. That's kind of a disqualifier for me, right? Like even if the resume actually looks pretty good, it shows a lack of attention to detail, moving a little too fast, and you just make sure that you proofread and you're accurate in regards to who your audience is. Mention a referral, mention somebody you know at the organization if there is such a case. As I mentioned, the cover letter is a great place to address the relocation. If you're open to relocation, if you want to relocate, that's a good place to do that, right? Because again, if you're not local to the role, a little bit different these days where a lot of roles are remote first or hybrid. But if it is on site somewhere and you are not local to that, it is a great place to call that out. Research, obviously, if you can, right, who to address the letter to, right? Like if there is a specific hiring manager, if there's a single HR person or recruiter, your hiring team or whatever, right? Something along those lines, I think is very worthwhile. And then if you are going to make the effort to put in a cover letter or write a cover letter, focus on two different things, right? Why you want to work for them, right? And why the company should hire you. Like those are the two things that you should really point out. And I've got a couple of examples here, and I'm not going to go, I'll kind of read through them. Just to kind of talk through the whole hum, as well as a well-positioned cover letter, right? So, dear sir or madam, I'd like to submit my resume for your consideration regarding the position of site reliability engineer. I feel that my experience will be a great fit for Stack Overflow. In addition to many years of experience with the Microsoft.NET stack, I also have experience in a variety of other languages. This background makes me a well-rounded developer and enables me to bring fresh perspectives to problems and tasks. Doesn't really say anything, right? Other than a slight regurgitation of probably what was already on the resume, right? It doesn't call out why the hell they really want to work there, right? It doesn't really necessarily say why they should work there. It's just hey, here's a 2 sentences of who the hell I am, right? Sorry, we'll go back. Same cover letter improved. I've used Stack Overflow for as long as I've been a developer, and I recently came across a post about the architecture of your products on Nick Craver's blog. It made me think I really want to work for these people who care so much about what they do. I'm super excited to hear about all the tools you have built to make developer processes more streamlined. That's right up my alley. My current job, I started out as web dev, but I was constantly blocked by broken builds and the multi-step process for getting code out to production. Took it upon myself to fix this by prototyping a continuous integration system that eventually turned into the system our team still uses today. As we started to grow, I'm focusing a lot more of my time on monitoring systems and currently evaluating some possible solutions. So that's a much nicer way to introduce yourself to somebody, and shows a little bit more thought around like why you actually want to work at this company, right? Again, like how your experience, and maybe a specific experience in this instance, is probably aligned to what the role is asking for, right? So these are things, right, that if you're going to write the cover letter, make sure you're conscious of, right? And sometimes they're worthwhile, sometimes they're not. I'm not a strong advocate for writing a cover letter for each one of your applications. Not worth your time. Sometimes it is. If there is, like this person obviously wants to work at Stack Overflow, right? In this sense, like spend some time, right? Write a few sentences, try to position yourself well, right? Again, the whole interview process, resume writing, this is marketing time, right? You are effectively marketing yourself. Do the best that you can to market yourself for where you want to be. Tips for your military experience, right? On your resume. This can be hard, right? And your resume coaches will help you on this too. But the biggest thing to probably call out is really try to avoid using jargon that no one outside of the forces would understand. There's going to be times, of course, that you have to maybe input some of it, but try to make it relatable to a general audience if at all possible. And again, getting back to some of the attributes and core capabilities that we discussed earlier, you've got things in your background and your experiences that you can highlight, right? And that, again, are transferable and appreciated by any employer, right? I'm not going to read through these. I've already read through the slide, a few slides already. I don't like to be the person who just reads a slide. But these are things that you have, right? And if you need to coax these out of your experience and put them onto paper, talk to your resume coach about it, right? Because you got it, right? And everybody's going to really appreciate those things. Again, these values, and you should be able to do it, right? Again, just avoid the acronyms and jargon that people outside of the military won't probably get. Does anybody have any questions about that one? That one sometimes raises a few, not flags, but hands. Nope. Straightforward. Okay, cool. So that's it, right? What's next? Under, I believe you've already been assigned and probably been in contact with your resume coaches. Is that correct? No? Yeah, great, awesome. So work with them, right? Show them what you've got. work through the drafts, right? Think in advance of the stories. And we talked about this last time. I talked a little bit about it today. If it's just free form shit, right, about what it is that you've actually done, it doesn't have to be bulleted and polished, right? The goal of working with somebody to get to a polished document is just, it's a data dump, right? And you'll refine it into what actually makes the most sense. So think through your experiences, think through all the employment that you've had, and just kind of create some stories, right? Try to find the data, try to find the numbers, and then you can refine that into the resume that you'll be putting out at the end of the cohort. So that's really all I've got today. Like I said, it's a pretty short. This one's a pretty short session. I think it's fairly straightforward. But are there any questions? Anybody have anything? Criticisms, complaints, comments?
I'm very relieved to hear what you said about cover letters, because I was always a little confused about them as well. So I'm glad it's not kind of always necessary, but just, pick and choose, and they are appropriate in some instances. So I appreciate that clarification.
Yeah, I think that I don't want to beat that dead horse, right? But they're good at times, right? And they make sense at times, but I don't think every application you make needs one, right? Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So I'm glad I could lift that weight off of your shoulders.
Hey, James, I had a question real quick.
Sure.
So when it comes to like writing which software you learned, so like SQL, any of those things, should you just list all of them on your resume and then just list them all in there? Or should you ever have to cut and skew them depending on what the job's requirements are?
I don't think there's any reason to not highlight the things I can't recall if I had said this before. Just make sure what you put on your resume is true, right? Like if you're gonna put a technology on there, right, or a language that that you've worked with, make sure you've worked with it, right? Like make sure you can speak to it. Don't put something on there just for an alphabet soup of technologies and languages. Make sure it's something that you actually feel comfortable talking about, because that'll get sussed out in an interview. There's nothing worse than saying, yeah, I'm highly proficient in Python, and you find out that actually, no, you're not, right? Like you shouldn't call yourself proficient in Python because you're not. So to answer that question, I don't think there's anything wrong with putting SQL, right? If you've worked with SQL, right? If you've worked with multiple flavors, right? When you talk about databases, right? Like how familiar are you with cloud environments? Have you worked with AWS instances? Like I'm getting, Oracle or Microsoft or MongoDB, open source, right? Like structured or unstructured, right? Like it is worth calling those things out. Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
James, I have a question. So I'm a military spouse, and I've been a full-time mom for almost 6 years. So do you think I should mention it and explain it in my resume for this 6 years gap?
Well, the question will come up, right, about the gap in your resume. I think that you could position it. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a gap on your resume, right? Certainly in today's day and age, it happens all the time. And I think there are ways to position it on your resume. I could talk to you about that offline. Your coach could walk you through that as well. But I think it's one of those things that, there's the elephant in the room, right? Like if the last experience on your resume was in 2015, they're going to want to know, well, what's happened since 2015, right? If it's staying at home, that's awesome, right? That's great. Well, what did you do to stay sharp or problem solve or whatever? Like here, you're obviously, continuing your education, right? Like return to the workforce. There's ways to position it, through either discussion of current projects and relevant experience, beyond just what would be from professional experience on your resume. I think that is worthwhile calling out, but just need to be careful how we do it. I can help you with that.
Thank you.
So James, I do kind of have an experience to share because I'm kind of curious about your feedback and then to see if anyone else here can relate. So I was a combat engineer in the military, and I noticed a lot of times that I go to interviews, the interview would go great, like, we're telling jokes, people laughing, whatever. I don't know how other people interviews are, but solid interviews, right? And they'll, go down the list. They're like, "Oh, this is great, this is great," and then they're like, Army, oh, combat engineer. Can you tell me about that?" So, I tell them, but I notice with a lot of interviews, a lot of times they read the combat word, they get like weird, and the rest of the interview is different, just different body language, different everything. I was curious. So actually, so what I did is I stopped putting the military on my resume. Most people can't tell I'm a veteran anyway. But since then, I've actually been getting more jobs and more job offers. So I was just kind of curious about your perspectives as a recruiter, and also if that has happened to anyone else here.
I'm curious to know if that's happened to others as well. I'm curious to know if that's happened to others as well. It's kind of bullshit in my mind. Right.
Jonathan, that's not you. That's happened to me too.
Yeah.
That's why actually when Tom was talking about one of our interview questions, one of our behavioral questions, I asked if military stories were okay, because typically I stay away from it. And I have found the same thing as Jonathan, to have a lot more success when I just, it eventually comes up, but it definitely doesn't have to come up in my interview.
Yeah. I think that there are certain aspects of your military experience that you shouldn't have to talk through, and I don't think that they can ask about that, right? So or they can't really ask about it. So it's disappointing to know that through discussion, obviously you can understand the question around your service is fine, right? Specific experiences under service can't really ask, but it's very interesting to know that the tenor of the conversation changed, right? Once that was broached. And that is unfortunate. They shouldn't ask the fucking questions, excuse me, if that's going to be the case. I will admit I'm also disappointed to learn that you're getting more traction in your job search leaving your military experience off. Because as a hiring manager, like I actually look for it, right? Like it's something that I like, because I think a lot of the experience that you've been through and the skills that you've gained are transferable. Like I want people to have that experience because they're going to be good employees, most likely, right? Like there's a stronger track record there, right? Than if not. I've got to actually think about that. Like the best way to answer that question, because I personally feel it's still valid to keep on your resume. But maybe there's a better way to deflect the conversation when it comes up. Which I'm a little not dumbfounded, but again, just kind of disappointed, right? Like that's unfortunate that that's the experience. But if you're not alone, then you're not alone. Yeah. Does anybody else have experience on that? Just out of curiosity?
Well, yeah, James, I was actually going to add to that. So I'm actually still serving in the National Guard. So I have, my monthly drills, and then I go away during the summer for a few weeks. And I've had experience where once we kind of get to my military experience and talk about, my military commitment, that again, the conversation just seems to have gone south. And so I guess wondering from your perspective, like hiring someone that's still serving, like, I mean, I kind of wanted to do an experiment where I left it off my resume and see how interviews went, but it's almost like, well, that's kind of lying, because then if I tell them, hey, I'm actually in the military, they're like, wait, why are you just telling us that now? So I don't know if there's any strategies around that.
Yeah, I got to think about this. Honestly, like this is the first time this has come up to this extent, and I've done a number of these cohorts. Number one, it's you're a protected class, right? As an active military participant, so there's no reason that it should preclude you from any sort of interview or hiring decision, right? That should not happen. And certainly, once hired, it can't preclude you from continued employment. That's not the way it works. I can't in good conscience say, don't put it on your resume, right? Because I think it is a valid experience that makes you who you are. So this is, I'm not necessarily torn because I don't like leaving things off of resumes, certainly that I think are worthwhile, right, to any position. I got to think about this a little bit more. I got to think about it. I know, like my current organization, I've got a number of vets across the board, right? It's something that's pretty important to us, and always has been. So yeah. But Guillermo, I understand where you're coming from. You're not leaving it off your resume now. You were talking about possibly doing that, right? To kind of A/B test, right? on like what kind of traction you can get.
I spent 20 years or 16 years in the National Guard for active duty. And I know, Daniel, you've probably heard of like the ESGR, Employer Supported the Guard and Reserve. But I know in the Guard, at least it seemed pretty common that it was an unspoken rule that when you're applying for jobs, you generally do not mention the fact that you were a Guard member. And just kind of the split that I've seen, at least in my experience, is that larger companies tend to value military experience in a way that sometimes, again, this is just my anecdotal experience, that smaller companies might not be as willing to kind of bring it on, but that's just what I've seen.
I don't think that's probably unfair to say, right? If we're going to make a blanket statement, a lot of larger organizations are looking for that, right? For a number of reasons. Smaller organizations might be a little bit more hesitant, but still, like I'm a little blown away by that comment, or by this actually happening. And Jordan, I'd agree. Like if somebody's going to take issue with your military experience, it's probably not a company that you want to work for. But maybe they're doing really cool stuff, right? Like maybe they just have bad perceptions for some reasons or misconceptions about vets and what that commitment can be. I do think the most important thing to look at here is how to talk through interview questions specifically aimed at your military experience, even without which is kind of where we started. I do think you broach those conversations with some sensitivity, right? Like obviously you want to talk about your experience, but remember that you're talking to civilians, right? And most likely talking to civilians, and just kind of keep it high level, right? And don't get too in the weeds in regards to what it was you were responsible for, unless it directly pertains to the opportunity. It's a good question. I got to think about that. I'm still a little unsure of how to give a good, robust answer.
Yeah, I'm just curious, would open source work have any weight on your resume? Because I've got I think a decent amount of open source work, and I've written a couple libraries myself, but I have no professional experience. So I mean, would that be something I should put on my resume or not?
Yeah, 100%. Right. Goes back to having a Git profile, right? Or that kind of highlights what it is that you've done. And commits that you made. I mean, people are going to be looking to see if you're doing stuff, right, besides what it just says on your resume. So I do feel that anything that you've contributed to anything open source makes sense. Absolutely.
Thanks.
How do you feel about that little section at the top where you talk? It's almost like the about section in your LinkedIn at the top. Is it necessary? Is it good? Is that a good place to address a work gap, or should we just leave it off?
Yeah, well, I don't think that the summary, which most people are going to call it a summary, right, is where you would address a gap in work, right? that would be if you have to address one in either a cover letter or in conversation, right? Or in the resume itself, right? Like as far as experiences are concerned. But it depends. I can't remember the format. I actually ought to look at the format that you're going to be using. I don't recall if the summary is actually a part of it. I do think it is worthwhile as an experienced engineer to have a quick summary, but it should be like 2-3 sentences, right? It should not be a paragraph. It should be something very simple: who you are, what got you here, and the technologies that you're focused on, right? And what your interests are, right? It should be pretty clean and quick, right? It shouldn't be anything too cumbersome.
Thank you.
That's my opinion, by the way. These are my opinions. Anybody else? All right. Well, thanks. So you're obviously going to be meeting with your resume coaches. Feel free to reach out to me for additional insight if you can. I'll try to get back. I'm actually in a crazy time of the year, but I definitely want to help as much as I possibly can. And then we have 2 more sessions coming up after the new year, where we're going to be talking about interviewing, right? Handling behavioral interviews, and then as well technical interviews. I'm hoping to pull in our VP of engineering, who's spoken to a number of cohorts at Platoon before, to help you understand from a hiring manager's perspective, what it is they're looking for, and how you can expect to prepare for, technical interviews, right? From phone screens all the way through to coding challenges. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. I do appreciate it. Have a great Thanksgiving in a couple of weeks, and depending upon where you are in the world, no matter where you are, stay warm, stay safe. And I'll see you in a few weeks.
All right. Thanks so much, James. As always, appreciate you. Looking forward to your January sessions. Have a good holiday ahead, and we'll see you in January.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, James.
All right, guys. We'll see you guys tomorrow.